Order of Free and Accepted Masons. There appeared to be no connection, however, between the revolt and Freemasonry, except for the name or title of its leader. He occupied the center stage of English history for just 8 days, and nothing is known of him except that he was the supreme commander of the rebellion. He was called Walter the Tyler, and it seemed at first to be mere coincidence that he bore the title of the enforcement officer of the Masonic Lodge. In Freemasonry, the Tyler, who must be a master mason, is the sentry, the sergeant-at-arms, and the officer who screens the credentials of visitors who seek entrance to the lodge. In remembrance of an earlier, more dangerous time, his post is just outside the door of the lodge room, where he stands with a drawn sword in his hand even to this day. I was aware that there had been many attempts in the past to link the Freemasons with the Knights Templar, but never with success. The fragile evidence advanced by proponents of that connection had never held up, sometimes because it was based on wild speculation, and at least once because it had been based on a deliberate forgery. But despite the failures to establish that link, it just will not go away, and the time-shrouded belief in some relationship between the two orders remains as one of the more durable legends of Freemasonry. That is entirely appropriate, because all of the various theories of the origins of Freemasonry are legendary. Not one of them is supported by any universally accepted evidence. Here I break from reading from the introduction of the book and interject a comment here. There was never any universally accepted evidence until you hear what you're going to hear tonight, produced by John Galt, an agent of the Citizens Agency for Joint Intelligence. The connection, dear listeners, is in the genealogy of the families of the elite. You are going to be amazed, and now I continue from the introduction to Born in Blood. I was not about to travel down that time-worn trail, and decided to concentrate my efforts on digging deeper into the history of the Knights Templar, to see if there was any link between the suppressed knights and the secret society behind the Peasants' Revolt. In doing so, I thought that I would be leaving Freemasonry far behind, and I couldn't have been more mistaken. Like anyone curious about medieval history, I had developed an interest in the Crusades, and perhaps more than just an interest. Those holy wars hold an appeal that is frequently as romantic as it is historical, and in my travels I had tried to drink in the atmosphere of the narrow defiles in the mountains of Lebanon through which Crusader armies had passed, and had sat staring at the castle ruins around Sidon and Tyre, trying to hear the clashing sounds of attack and defense. I had marveled at the walls of Constantinople, and had strolled the arsenal of Venice, where Crusader fleets were assembled. I had sat in the round church of the Knights Templar in London, trying to imagine the ceremony of its consecration by the Patriarch of Jerusalem in 1185, more than 300 years before Columbus set sail west to the Indies. The Templar Order was founded in Jerusalem in 1118 in the aftermath of the First Crusade. Its name came from the location of its first headquarters on the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon. Helping to fulfill a desperate need for a standing army in the Holy Land, the Knights of the Temple soon grew in numbers, in wealth, and in political power. They also grew in arrogance, and their Grand Master de Redfort was a key figure in the mistakes that led to the fall of Jerusalem in 1187. The Latin Christians managed to hold on to a narrow strip of territory along the coast, where the Templars were among the largest owners of the land and the fortifications. Finally, the enthusiasm for sending men and money to the Holy Land waned among the European kingdoms, which were preoccupied with their own wars against each other. By 1296, the Egyptian Sultan was able to push the resident Crusaders along with the military orders into the sea. The Holy Land was lost, and the defeated Knights Templar moved their base to the island kingdom of Cyprus, dreaming of yet one more crusade to restore their past glory. As the Templars planned a new crusade against the infidel, King Philip IV of France was planning his own private crusade against the Templars. He longed to be rid of his massive debts to the Templar order, which had used its wealth to establish a major international banking operation. Philip wanted the Templar treasure to finance his continental wars against Edward I of England. After 2 decades of fighting, England on one side and the Holy Roman Church on the other, 2 unrelated events gave Philip of France the opportunity he needed. Edward I died, and his deplorably weak son took the throne of England as Edward II. On the other front, Philip was able to get his own man on the throne of Peter as Pope Clement V. When word arrived on Cyprus that the new pope would mount a crusade, the Knights Templar thought that their time of restoration to glory was at hand. Summoned to France, their aging Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, went armed with elaborate plans for the rescue of Jerusalem. In Paris, he was humored and honored until the fatal day. At dawn, on Friday, the 13th of October, in the year 1307, every Templar in France was arrested and put in chains on Philip's orders. Their hideous torture for confessions of heresy began immediately. When the Pope's orders to arrest the Templars arrived at the English court, young Edward II took no action at all. He protested to the pontiff that the Templars were innocent. Only after the Pope issued a formal bull on November the 22nd in the year 1307 was the English king forced to act. In January, in the year 1308, Edward finally issued orders for the arrest of the Knights Templar in England, but the 3 months of warning had been put to good use. Many of the Templars had gone underground, while some of those arrested managed to escape. Their treasure, their jeweled reliquaries, even the bulk of their records, had totally disappeared. In Scotland, the papal order was not even published. Under those conditions, England, and especially Scotland, became targeted havens for fugitive Templars from continental Europe, and the efficiency of their concealment spoke to some assistance from outside, or from each other. The English throne passed from Edward II to Edward III, who bequeathed the crown to his 10-year-old grandson, who, as Richard II watched from the Tower as the peasants' revolt exploded throughout the city of London. Much had happened to the English people along the way. Incessant wars had drained most of the king's treasury, and corruption had taken the rest. 1/3 of the population had perished in the Black Death, and famine exacted further tolls. The reduced labor force of farmers and craftsmen found that they could earn more for their labor, but their increased income came at the expense of land-owning barons and bishops, who were not prepared to tolerate such a state of affairs. Laws were passed to reduce wages and prices to pre-plague levels, and genealogies were searched to reimpose the bondage of serfdom and villeinage on men who thought themselves free. The king's need for money to fight his French wars inspired new and ingenious taxes. The oppression was coming from all sides, and the pot of rebellion was brought to the boil. Religion didn't help either. The landowning church was as merciless a master as the landowning nobility. Religion would have been a source of confusion for the fugitive Templars as well. They were a religious body of warrior monks who owed allegiance to no man on earth except the Holy Father, according to the Holy Father, but according to the Templars in secret, their allegiance was only to themselves. When their Pope turned on them, chained them, beat them, he broke their link with God. In 14th century Europe, there was no pathway to God except through the Vicar of Christ on earth. If the Pope rejected the Templars, and the Templars rejected the Pope, they had to find a new way to worship their God, at a time when any variation from the teachings of the established church was blasted as heresy. That dilemma called to mind the central tenet of Freemasonry, which requires only that a man believe in a supreme being, with no requirements as to how he worships the deity of his choice. In Catholic Britain, such a belief would have been a crime, but it would have accommodated the fugitive Templars who had been cut off from the universal church. In consideration of the extreme punishment for heresy, such an independent belief also made sense of one of the more mysterious of Freemasonry's old charges, the ancient rules that still govern the conduct of the fraternity.